Hello, and welcome to Module 5 of Advanced Statistics in Healthcare. This module will focus on how to decide which project to start or recommend, and is designed to give you a basic understanding of how you might better define a project and its objectives and goals. We'll talk about why projects often fail and how to use that understanding to help you see where opportunities exist. We will discuss how to define objectives and outcomes, and then review the basics of creating a plan for your project. In order to understand how to define a good project, one that will be supported to its conclusion, you first need to know why projects can fail. The most common reason a project fails is because it is not clearly tied to a defined need. Doing a project just to do a project can be considered a waste of time and resources. The second reason a project often fails is because, although there was a need that was clearly defined, the project itself did not have its objectives aligned with the needs of the business. So there are two things we can learn from this. One, a successful project should be able to be tied to a specific legitimate need. And two, it needs to have its objectives clearly aligned with the needs of the business. This sounds easy enough, right? We just need to find the need and make sure our project has objectives that match up. Unfortunately, this is not as easy as it may seem at first. In the next few slides, we are going to focus on a few of the common roadblocks to achieving the start of a successful project. Let's look at what might be behind the first reason of project failure, not having a clearly defined need. Often, this situation can come about for several reasons. Maybe in talking to people about what the need or issue is, a solution seems to become apparent. These types of solutions should be taken with a grain of salt, and a bit further investigation should be done to make sure that A, this solution is adequate, and B, it will actually meet the need that is there. You want to make sure that you are finding and addressing the root cause rather than just doing a quick fix. One of the most frequent issues with clearly defining a need is that you need to determine what exactly the need might be. A solution or several solutions seem to become obvious. This can often occur when you are looking to make something more efficient. If it takes too long to get blood work back, we need to increase the number of lab techs or testing equipment, right? Since all of you have already completed Course 2, you should be immediately thinking, wait just a minute, what about looking at the entire process? Do we really know that getting more of something will fix the issue? Maybe the delay is occurring during the transportation part of the process rather than not having enough techs. The next reason for not having a clearly defined need is one most of you have probably encountered: too many opinions. Everyone has an opinion, especially when it comes to needing to create a definition. As we learned in Course 2, you want to make sure that you are talking to the right people and not just going with what seems like the best opinion. Another common reason for not defining a need is that the analysis of the current situation just takes too much time. Yes, analysis takes time, but as you have learned throughout the past two courses, good analysis pays off in the long run. The skills that you are learning can help you to combat this particular reason within your organization. The final reason for not having a well-defined understanding of the business need is that many people feel that a good needs analysis is just too confusing. This may be to those without a background in analytics, but by using the tools you've learned thus far in the certificate program, you will be able to choose the appropriate type of analysis for the situation. Another key reason for project failure is not having a good understanding of the payoff, i.e., what are the results going to be? Questions that need to be answered in order to gain this type of understanding are those such as, is it worth it? And is it feasible? You want to make sure that you know the difference between cost savings and cost avoidance. This all comes down to helping to reduce the uncertainty with the necessary decision making through the use of data analysis. You may not be able to eliminate the uncertainty entirely, but at least you can help to reduce or narrow it down, making the decision that is made that much stronger. Knowing that you can help to reduce uncertainty can go a long way towards increasing the chance that you are making the best decision for the situation. Any major decision that requires a certain degree of uncertainty can be made better if any of this uncertainty can be removed from the data available for making the decision. In a nutshell, much of the failure of a project can come back to inadequate planning. Throughout the courses in this certificate program, we've talked about the importance of planning. Planning your data analysis, planning your process, and planning how to best share your results. The last piece of planning that ties all of these together is planning the project. In project planning, not only in project execution, you need to ensure that you have a good outline of the project, as well as a plan for any data collection that will take place. Then you need to have a plan to assess the impact of any results you may find. You should be able to understand how the importance of planning can help to avoid project failure. If you know what you're going to do, how to measure it, and how to communicate the results, your project stands a much greater chance of success. A key piece of knowing if a project is going to succeed or fail is understanding of the opportunity available. This goes beyond the idea of, do we need to do this, to understanding how to look at the value of the project and its potential results. Without being able to articulate the opportunity, you will have a hard time showing how the project fits into the larger picture and why it would be beneficial to the organization to complete it. Let's start with looking at value. Value can be many things in an organization. Much of the time, we get stuck on the idea that value equals money, whether cost or return on investment. We focus on the cost of the improvements and look for the savings that it can bring in financial terms. When looking at project costs, you are generally looking at things such as equipment and supplies and travel and staff time. For the improvement costs, these are things such as training, construction, equipment and supplies, and even staff salary increases. This is indeed an important aspect that you need to look at. However, there are other types of value that can be considered to be equally important and should be measured as a part of any major project decision. In healthcare, three major value groups that you should consider are the patient, the staff, and the facility. Value to the patient can be measured in terms of safety, effectiveness, and timeliness of care delivered. Values important to staff generally include things such as safety, satisfaction, leadership, and culture. Value to the facility consists of commonly known measures such as compliance, revenue, efficiency, reliability, and meeting the mission. Ultimately, the value of something is determined by how much it matters or relates to the decision being considered and those making that decision. Another key piece of understanding the available opportunity is to understand the needs of the organization. How will this project take advantage of an opportunity and address a need? Probably the most common needs that are used to justify projects are business needs. Business needs are those needs that address the potential for gains in productivity, quality, efficiency, time, and cost. I'm guessing this list is familiar to several, if not most of you. A further way to divide business needs into manageable groups is to also understand the difference between tangible and intangible measures. Tangible measures are those measures that look at things that already have numbers, such as output, quality, cost, and time. Or they might be things such as survey responses, customer complaints, employee satisfaction, things that are measured but may not be considered hard data. Tangible measures can be converted to monetary amounts. Intangible measures, by contrast, are those measures that are intentionally not converted to money. The more tangible measures you have, the more you can show the effects of the project on the business need. Once you have an understanding of the business needs your project may address, you need to next look at why the organization has been unable to address those needs or take advantage of the opportunity available. What is holding things back? One place to look is in the area of job performance needs. Remember, in this context, jobs performance is not necessarily the performance of an individual, but rather the performance of the system. Think about the different tools you learned in Course 2 for reviewing a process and how it functions. A similar approach can be taken with learning needs. Once you have an understanding of the current situation, you can then determine if there is an appropriate skill set present in those who are involved in the process. Learning needs may be large if the project is to introduce a drastic change to the existing way of doing things. They may be small if the project is looking at upgrading some steps or changing to a slightly different workflow or reporting template. The key with learning needs is to understand what skills are actually required versus what skills are present, and do those needed skills apply to the situation. Lastly, you always need to make sure that you understand the preference needs. Preference needs are those things that guide how the project is to be conducted. These would be things such as the budget, team members, time available to complete the project, deliverables, and so forth. Often, the preference needs are set by the project sponsors and its stakeholders. It is important that preference needs are understood by the entire project team at the beginning of the project in order to ensure the project stays on track. A few things to remember about addressing the needs we've just discussed. Once you understand what needs your project will be addressing, you begin to address them by looking for other similar situations that may have some applicable measures and outcomes. You now have a better understanding of what data you might need to provide an initial framework for the project, as well as what data you won't need. Additionally, you should also know what information you might need to fill in any gaps and some ideas how to find that information. As you work towards understanding the available opportunity, you will need to clarify some specific ideas. You want to make sure you have a good knowledge of any assumptions that might be made, either about the project itself, the opportunity available, or any outcomes that are expected. Knowing the assumptions, or as many of them as possible, upfront will help you to better plan the project and reduce surprises down the road. You need to clarify any particular types of measurements that you may be looking for in order to frame the outcome of the project appropriately. If you understand the purpose of the measurement, you can determine what the measurement actually means and how you can measure it in a way that will contribute to the value of the project itself. Additionally, you also need to be able to address the question of, what if we don't do this? Things to look at here include the possible deterioration of the situation, effects on any operational problems, possible changes to the budget, and possible loss of influence or support. Once you understand the opportunity and how that opportunity fits into the larger organization, you need to start defining things. One of the first things to define in a project is the objectives. If you don't know what the objective of conducting the project is and why it's important, it will be extremely difficult to gain support for the project's efforts. In order to develop objectives that are useful, both to the project team and to the stakeholders, the project should identify objectives on multiple levels. These levels correspond to the different types of needs discussed a few minutes ago. The first level of objectives to consider are the reaction objectives. These objectives generally tie into both business and preference needs. They look at things that form the basis of the potential for success on the project. They may deal with relevance, usefulness, importance, and appropriateness. The next set of objectives to consider are those related to any learning needs. Every project, at some point, will have some objective related to learning. It may be that the project team needs to better understand a process. It may be that a change to a situation will be the result of the project and training of staff will need to take place. The project may require a retraining of patients, such as learning a new method of checking in for appointments. The learning objective may be known at the start of the project, or may not be known until near the end. In either case, the objectives related to learning still need to be outlined. Application and implementation objectives are those that define what is expected from the project and what the target levels may be. They provide the milestones that tell you when different expectations have been met as the project moves along. These objectives describe the expected outcomes at different stages of the project while it is in progress. Impact objectives are those objectives that are tied into key business needs or measures that should improve as your application and implementation objectives are completed. They are also usually tied to a performance measure and are very specific. Impact objectives look at the overall expected outcomes of the project. The final category of objectives is those related to ROI, or return on investment. Depending on your job, some of you may have worked with ROI in the past, while for others, this is the first in-depth look at it. In order to understand ROI, you need to understand the concepts of uncertainty and risk. The basic definition of uncertainty is a lack of complete 100% certainty. In other words, it is a situation in which more than one possible answer or result exists, and in which we don't know the true outcome. To measure uncertainty, we need to assign a probability of occurrence to each of the possible results. The basic definition of risk is a situation in which the uncertainty around the possible results involves an undesirable outcome. This is usually a loss of some sort, or even a catastrophe. To measure risk, we need to determine the levels of uncertainty and match it to a quantified measure of loss. To put it simply, understanding both the amount of uncertainty and the amount of risk possible in a project can help you to determine the return on investment. The basic equation for ROI is to take the annual benefits minus the projected cost and divide that by the actual cost, and then multiply that result by 100 to get a percent. In order to know whether or not a particular ROI is worth the investment, you also need to understand the level of uncertainty and risk that is acceptable. This is particularly true if more than one scenario is possible. Thus, the more uncertainty you can take out of the equation, the better understanding of the projected costs and benefits you will have, making your assessment of the potential risk more accurate. As we conclude this course, we will be talking about several different ways in which you can assess the level of risk and better understand the amount of uncertainty in order to help you analyze different situations and present a comprehensive project package that can assist in decision making. In addition to understanding outcomes and being able to define the objectives to match those opportunities, you also need to know how to define the outcomes of the project. You need to know how to translate opportunities and objectives into something that is measurable, something that can give you a defined ending point for your project. If outcomes are well defined for multiple projects, it can become much easier to determine what the level of risk is for a particular project and how that level can be compared to others. The place to start with learning how to define objectives is to understand why we need to have outcomes. Outcomes can help us to provide better information for use in decision making by giving the decision makers the knowledge and understanding of the project risks and benefits. Good outcome measures can help to see if there is a measured improvement in quality of care or other types of quality improvement initiatives. However, assessing outcomes may come with barriers. Let's look at a few of the more common barriers you might encounter. One of the most common excuses for creating an outcome measure is that it will take too much effort to collect the data. As you should know from earlier in this course, the data are often there. It is understanding how to find, organize, and interpret it that it takes some effort. And if you have the tools for data mining and analysis, this time can often be shortened greatly. Another barrier that is often presented is that there is no clear remedial action to a particular problem or project goal. This can be true, but what needs to be the focus of the outcome is to look for the non-obvious actions to improve the situation. Another barrier to creating outcome measures is that many people are uncomfortable with the idea of probability of success versus certainty of success. Using data and statistics to show how exactly the risks might be and on what level they can be addressed can often overcome this barrier. Much of the time, people will want to know with 100% certainty that the project will succeed. While you can never have 100% certainty, you can provide additional knowledge around the probability of success. You can help to reduce uncomfortable feeling around a project's potential risks. Often, you'll come across those that say that since all we have available is group data, these results aren't applicable to my situation. Creating a signature of a person, patient, or situation can help to see where the group data best fits the current situation and where anomalies might lie. Alternately, you might have the situation where the argument is along the lines of, as my patients are unique, we don't have enough data to do any analysis. As you have seen, it is generally not a case of the data not existing or that there isn't enough data, but that we don't know where to find the data. An argument that is often made that is similar to the group data or data collection argument is the argument that the data is out of date. Again, the data are there, you just need to determine how to bring it up to date. Finally, one barrier that is generally more common to medicine and healthcare than to other areas is that there is always the issue of joint accountability. Who or what is responsible for the outcomes? In the vast majority of situations, there is no one person or thing that can be pointed to as the only cause of a particular outcome. As we have discussed in past courses, there are often multiple causes that are intertwined. This is to be expected. You can weigh the importance of a cause to an outcome. For the most part, though, as long as you understand that most outcomes will have more than one cause, this barrier should not have a large impact on conducting a project. Of course, none of this information is truly useful without creating a plan. Some of you may have used different methods of project planning in the past, or even created a project charter. There are many methods of project planning that are available and very successful. In this course, we are going to concentrate more on what should go into a good project plan rather than focusing on a specific methodology or type of worksheet. All of the tools that you will learn around project planning are able to be applied in all sorts of situations. For many types of situations, a basic set of steps can be used to help you create a definition of the project that you're interested in completing or that you have been asked to assist with. First, you need to define the question or determine what the problem or situation is that has uncertainty surrounding it. You want to make sure that this includes making sure that there is an organizational need or that you are aligning with the organizational goals. You want to develop a model of what you already know about the situation. Next, you want to do a literature review. Now, you might be saying, I'm not writing in a paper to be published, and I'm not really doing a research study, so I don't need to do this step. You want to think about a literature review in a much broader sense. A review of literature can definitely involve looking at published research. Perhaps some of the EBM guidelines might apply to the situation, and that is a traditional type of literature review. But you can also do a review of other projects similar to yours that may have already been completed. You can look for ideas on benchmarking, both within your facility or from another facility or group. You may want to review documents or data mining that you've completed for another project. You may be reviewing the data definition files of different cubes to determine if one might apply to your project, or if you're going to need to build custom reports. All of these things can be considered a literature review. You are reviewing the available information around situations that are similar to yours to help you determine the best path forward. After that, you need to determine definitions for any variables that you may be interested in. Variables may be things that you are looking at experimenting with, or they might be things that you are just interested in finding more out about. In addition to determining what a variable is, you also need to determine how you might measure the variables as part of their definition. You need to be able to understand the value of the information you will be gathering and how you can apply those measurements throughout your process. Last, you need to develop the actual plan for the project. If you've had Lean Six Sigma training, this would be similar to the project charter. The difference in this case is that you also need to provide more details beyond just here is the issue and here's how we are going to attack solving it. You want to provide key details around what the need for the project is, what has already been done in similar situations, and specifically what you are going to do to measure and how you are going to measure it. The plan is less about the when of the project steps, but more about the why for the project. Remember, at this point, you may still not be completely certain that you are even going to be able to conduct the project. Let's discuss value a little more. In order to understand what value is and how it's intertwined with all aspects of an organization, you need to know how we got to the modern idea of value. Historically, value was measured by how much you got accomplished. Thinking about effects or results was generally not considered. It was the amount of activity that really mattered. Now, however, things have changed in most organizations. The activity needs to produce some sort of results, and these results need to add to the organization in some way. This is now the idea of value, the manner in which the results contribute in a monetary way versus the cost. Once you know how value is broadly defined, you can begin to see the impact of understanding how to calculate the return on investment. ROI is easy to calculate when things are quantitative and the data is easily collected. It is when some of the outcomes are not tangible or are not easily defined that explaining the ROI becomes complicated. As we move through the course, we will talk about different ways of measuring those intangibles and how to incorporate them into a valid ROI calculation. Another aspect of value that has changed over the years is the idea that information can have value. When you actually stop to think about it, information can add value in several ways. It can help to reduce uncertainty, and reducing uncertainty around anything that might have an economic consequence, either good or bad, is a good thing. Information can affect behavior. It can affect the behavior of those involved in the project, the team, or the stakeholders. It can affect the behavior of those the project outcomes are directed towards. Information can also have market value. What are different types of value? Who do you need to consider when looking at these types of value? The three major groups you want to keep in mind throughout this course, as well as whenever you're considering a project, are the patient, the staff, and the agency. The patient and the staff groups should be pretty easy to understand. The agency is the different levels of the organization you work for. Each of these groups has a different perspective and a different set of values. Each is important to consider when evaluating a project. As you consider the value definitions of each of the three major groups of stakeholders, you want to look at how they might fit into one of three perspectives: environmental, economical, and societal. Environmental encompasses more than just a standard idea that's in the news around the effects of the environment. It includes anything in the general surroundings. So yes, the project might have an impact on the environment, but more likely it will have an impact on the environment of the clinic, hospital, or even the cafeteria and parking lot. Similarly, the economic perspective doesn't only have to do with a larger economy, but may have to do with how much care costs in different locations, or what the economic order quantity is for the year, or even what form of transportation is best used when transporting patients. Societal, then, is the impact of the non-tangible things, such as satisfaction surveys or perceptions of cleanliness or learning opportunities. You can begin to see how each of the different stakeholders might have a different set of values for each of these perspectives. Understanding how to balance them is what you will be working towards in the next couple weeks. Of course, one of the things that you always need to keep in mind when considering value is how it fits with the tangible inputs and outputs. You need to make sure that there is a balance between monetary and non-monetary measures. You can do this by looking for data that is both quantitative and data that is qualitative. Maybe your data is looking at the actual expenses of certain activities and comparing them to potential ROI from expanding those activities. Remember, data which is considered valuable may not always come from a single time frame, but may be best reviewed over several different time frames. You want to make sure that your data comes from credible sources and that the collection methods are consistent over time. Both of these should sound familiar as we've discussed them in every course thus far. In addition to the commonly used monetary values, there are also 6 other types of value that you should take into consideration when looking at a project. First is reaction and perceived value. How are those who have a stake in the outcome, as well as those affected by the outcome, going to react? Does the value delivered by the project fit with the value structure in a way that they expect? Next is learning and confidence. What may need to be learned as part of conducting the project, or to implement the project? How will you be able to ensure those involved in the project remain confident in their role, in the progress, in the results? This leads to application and implementation. How will project learnings and outcomes be applied and implemented? Will there need to be a set of internal milestones for the project? Will things need to be applied in a certain order? Will the project outcome be considered to include the implementation? Once you have the project ideas and theories applied, you need to start considering the results, as well as the impact of those results. Will this project have impacts limited to a department or location? Or is it a small test of change that is planned to be replicated if outcomes are good? What if the results are not good? How might that change the impact for better or worse? How are you going to document the results? How will you measure the impact? In almost every project, you will need to calculate a return on investment. The ROI might be financial, or it may only be a change in perceptions. How can you estimate the ROI? You may have all the information available, or you may have to create measures yourself. Can you look to see if anyone else has calculated a similar ROI? How much of the uncertainty can you eliminate? Finally, you need to look at the intangible benefits. These are often as important as the financial outcomes. In some projects, the value of the intangibles may actually outweigh the monetary results. These are things such as perceptions, changes in survey responses, mood, etc. These are often the hardest to determine and measure, and as such, we will be spending some time talking about how to create some of these intangible measures so that you are able to fully define all aspects of a project. Let's take a quick look at some of the most common uses of value definition. Many of these will probably be quite familiar to you as they have been gaining more and more visibility in recent years. First is project costs. As budgets get tighter and costs of doing business rise, understanding the value placed on project costs is a needed skill. The business outlook has changed, and what was considered a general business cost now is scrutinized to see if the appropriate investment is being made. In healthcare, continuing education is now a needed expense, as technology and research constantly bring new ideas and options into practice. Half a century ago, many healthcare workers were thought to have enough knowledge from the residency or internships, and other knowledge was picked up on the job. Accountability. Standards for accountability are ever more moving higher. Accountability not only applies to actions of an individual, but also to those of a department. We review budget allocations, looking at staffing levels and expertise, consider supply orders, and react to satisfaction survey results. All of these are types of accountability, and depending on the specific organization or department, each type might have a different level of value. Reducing overhead is a common use of value, although not one you think of right away. Value of the organization at multiple levels can be used to determine what is valuable to the employees and to the customers in order to make decisions about what should be kept around and what could be eliminated. Another common use of value is in making process improvements. Think about the different process improvement tools you learned in Chapter 2. Several of them looked at perception and value among the organization, particularly those that dealt with looking for a root cause. A major question that is asked of almost every project these days is, how will it show an improvement? Supporting the business process is another use of value definitions. A way that you can look at this use of value is to go back to your balanced scorecard. How do the goals of your project fit into each of the four main perspectives? What order will those perspectives need to be for this project? And how will they tie into the goals of the larger organization? Are the value definitions the same at all levels? Another common, but not always recognized, use of value definitions is benchmarking. When you look for a location or project to use as a benchmark for your situation, you look for a similar situation with a similar value structure. Matching key goals and outcome results is using a form of values. Looking for a common mission or vision in your organization that you are benchmarking with is a form of value. Ultimately, all of these uses come down to being able to use evidence-based decision-making strategies. After all of this discussion about value and what it is and how you measure it, you can't forget about the counterpart, risk. In addition to knowing what a particular risk is, you need to know how the values of the organization will affect the outcome. Should you take the risk or not? Let's take a few minutes and talk about how value and risk interact, which we'll discuss in more detail next week. So why should we care about how the perception of values affect the perception of risks? Well, first, if you don't understand the value system of the group looking at the project, or those who may be affected by the project, you won't completely understand what is considered risky and what is not. Second, in order to know what type of risk to look at, you need to know what level of risk may or may not be acceptable. How do you determine this? Values. Let's take a look at some of the main measures that combine value and risks so that you can get a sense of what we're talking about. First up is opportunity loss versus expected opportunity lost. Opportunity loss is looking at a single option. It is the cost of choosing the wrong path. Expected opportunity loss is for when you are looking at multiple options. It is the cost of choosing the wrong path multiplied by the chance of this being the wrong choice. You would use EOL if you are uncertain about the possibility of negative consequences for your choice. The existence of EOL is why so many business decisions take a long time to make. Similar to OL and EOL is understanding the expected value of information versus the expected value of perfect information. The expected value of information is the reduction in the EOL, or the difference between the EOL before measurement and the EOL after measurement. This comes about as a result of any measurement that has value. Also has the ability to reduce uncertainty around a decision. Another way to think about the expected value of information is that it is equal to the value of the reduction of risk. It applies to the value of all information, perfect or not. How does this compare to the expected value of perfect information? The expected value of perfect information is the same as EOL of the alternative that you choose, or the EOL before the measurement is taken. There isn't a version of this for the EOL after, as if you have perfect information, all uncertainty is gone, so your EOL would be 0. Another measure that is also asked about is how much does this cost? Again, this is a different way of looking at value of the information as well as opportunity. You can answer this question by finding the expected cost of information. On a basic level, this is just how much we might expect to pay for a reduction in our uncertainty. How much it costs to get the information that will help us in determining our reduction in risk. You need to know the range of each of the possible outcomes of a measurement, the cost of each measurement, the expected reduction in uncertainty for each, and then find the average of each of these. Next, you decide if you need to assign a weighting factor to any of the averages and add everything up. Generally, all of these calculations result in estimates, not actual results. As long as you keep in mind that you are estimating, these calculations are not as complicated as it might seem at first. Additionally, you want to remember that if you have a lot of uncertainty, even a small amount of data or information can reduce it significantly. If you have a lot of unknowns, you really don't need much to tell you something new. Keeping this idea in mind can help you to create estimates of outcomes of projects. Let's discuss two ideas that can influence how a particular risk characteristic is viewed: severity and comorbidity. On the surface, most of you have probably heard these terms in relation to medical conditions or diagnoses. Once you understand the definitions, you can take the definitions and apply them to non-medical situations. Severity should be fairly easy to understand. The more severe the condition, the higher the risk, and the more likely the outcome is to be negative. Comorbidity refers to the situation of having more than one condition present. Generally, the more comorbidities present, the higher the risk. One example of severity is the Borg scale of perceived exertion. The scale is used in exertion testing and consists of a calibrated scale that provides the patient a way in which to identify how difficult the exertion is for them. Another simple example is the low back classification system. This system is similar to the way FMEAs are completed, with certain levels translating to a number. An example of comorbidities is the use of DRGs by insurance companies to determine like groups of patients, who are then put in subgroups of those who have similar set of conditions coexisting. In addition, a generic version of comorbidity risk measure is simply list out all the possible conditions and use a binary system to identify if the condition is present. Then you can just total the results. You can also identify weighting factors for certain conditions if they are considered more important or higher risk to recognize those values. Next, we will discuss how we quantify risks. So how do you go about quantifying something like tolerance at risk? First, you need to determine the acceptable tolerance level and then compare it to your project's potential for risk. In order to determine tolerance, you need to know how much risk you or your organization are willing to take. You can sort of think of this as similar to a return on investment calculation, but from a different point of view. In looking at risk tolerance, you are interested in the amount of risk the organization is willing to take to get a certain return on the investment. A complicating factor when looking at tolerance for risk is that every person in every organization will have a slightly different idea of what is tolerable and where the tipping point is. Your job is to try and look at the different values of the group that you'll be working with as a part of the project before, during, and after, and try and determine what tolerance levels might be and how best to integrate those levels into a single focus for the project. Because each group will view the project outcome slightly differently, you need to make sure that your determination of risk will match up with the value structure of each group as best as possible. One technique you can use to help determine what level of risk tolerance might be is modern portfolio theory, or MPT. MPT is a way to create a chart that will enable those invested in your project to show where that level is for them. It is a way to show how much risk they are willing to take in order to get a certain return or outcome from the project. This may not sound like it would apply to healthcare all that much, but remember, the investment and return don't have to be monetary in nature. They could be a change in satisfaction score or a change in workload or process time. What you are trying to find out is the answer to the question, is it worth it to you? You can do this by creating an investment boundaries chart and having individuals plot different scenarios on the chart to get a sense of what they would or would not tolerate risk-wise. As you can see from the example, you don't need to have a scenario involving money to create the chart. You just need to have a sense of what the risk might be. Each person or group you talk to may have a different idea of where each individual scenario fits on the chart. But by combining all the results into a simple chart, you can get a sense of what the overall tolerance for risk for this project would be and what scenarios are considered to be the most tolerable. This gives you a place to start when looking at possible project options. In addition to understanding a level of tolerance for risk, you also need to be able to assess the potential need for a trade-off due to the type of or amount of investment. At what point would the trade-off be worth the investment? You are probably thinking that it sounds a lot like figuring out what the risk level is, and you're correct. It is very similar. But look at the investment from a slightly different perspective. Two of the most common trade-offs that are made, regardless of the industry, are changes in performance and quality. If you think about these two ideas, both of them are rather intangible measures. What good performance or quality is to one individual may not have the same meaning to another. Both are very subjective measures. Again, we can go back to considering both of these from the perspective of our three customer groups. Think about what makes up your definition of performance or quality in providing clinical care. What about in providing data support and analyst support? What would good performance and good quality mean there? Knowing that there are differences in opinion around what constitute intangibles like performance and quality, you can see how there might be an issue in determining at what point the trade-off is worth it. One way to deal with this is to consider a trade-off situation similar to that of looking at the risk versus the return, as a trade-off is really another form of risk. Think about how you might compare these two scenarios. Is a medical center that decreases the readmissions by 80% and decreases its patient satisfaction score by 10% better overall than one that decreases readmissions by 70% and decreases patient satisfaction scores by 5%? We know that these two situations should be comparable, but how can you compare them? We can also use something called a utility curve that looks very similar to the investment boundaries chart that we just reviewed. In a utility curve, you determine what combinations of what things are equivalent. The highest curve on the chart is always your best case scenario. The curves below are always less desirable outcomes. This gives you a way in which to compare what seems like widely different scenarios containing multiple variables. You can think of the lines on the utility chart similar to those on a topographical map. They don't always go in a straight line, but each continuous line is the same altitude from sea level, regardless of how it curves. This gives you a way to compare the possible trade-offs when you are looking at different project scenarios and trying to determine which would give the best results.